Welcome back to another episode of the Tech Talks Daily podcast. I'm your host, Neil C. Hughes, and I'm here to bring you insightful conversations with industry leaders every single day of the year. And today, I'm going to be taking a deep dive into the world of content management and digital transformation with Tim Hood, VP for EMEA and APAC at Hyland. Now, Hyland is a pioneer in the field of intelligent content management and process automation, and they appeared on my radar because they serve more than half of the Fortune 100 companies. And over the past 15 years, Tim's leadership and strategic insights have also seen Hyland's European team expand dramatically from 48 to over 600. So when I wanted to explore this topic in greater detail, obviously Tim was a standout guest, so I invited him to come on here and share his story and the story of Hyland, and thankfully he said yes. So in this episode, we're going to uncover the challenges and frustrations often associated with legacy systems in terms of things like data storage, processing, and delve into the reasons businesses cling to those old legacy systems, discuss the potential of the cloud and modern technologies in mitigating some of these issues and challenges that we're all seeing. And furthermore, I'm also hoping we'll get an understanding of the nuances of the content management market across different regions. And I know we have people listening across 165 different countries. So that's another reason I'm quite passionate about finding out more about those nuances. So whether you are a tech enthusiast, a business owner, or a seasoned IT professional looking to stay ahead of the curve, we got a great conversation for you today. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to West Yorkshire here in the UK, where Tim Hood is waiting to join us. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Certainly. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Thanks for the invitation. Very much appreciated. My name's Tim Hood, and I have the pleasure to be the Vice President with overall commercial responsibility for Hyland Software in EMEA and the Asia Pacific regions. I've worked pretty much my entire life in the technology sector. I came to Hyland in mid-2017 as part of an acquisition. I actually started this journey way back when, in January 2010, when I joined an organization called Brainware, which is an intelligent data capture software that we still own and sell. I joined as the junior salesperson in Europe way back in 2010. Went through a series of fun and frantic acquisitions, mergers, splits, sales, but didn't actually ever leave the original organization, as we still own Brainware. Joined Hyland through acquisition and have seen rapid growth in EMEA and Asia Pacific. And if you'd have asked me a few years ago, I'd have said I'm a sales leader. But these days, I say I'm a technology leader because my scope has broadened a lot more and well outside of just my original background in the sales function, Neil.
I love that. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. And you were talking there how your job role or your job title has changed. I suspect over the last 15 years in content management, I would imagine you've also witnessed the evolution of many legacy systems too. So I'm curious, what are some of the classic frustrations that these systems still tend to throw up, and how do they impact businesses in terms of things like inflexibility, niche limitations, performance gaps? I could go on and on, but what are you seeing there?
Well, you've named a few good starters for me there, Neil. I think the one of the biggest things that we've seen, particularly since COVID and lockdown, is the need for flexibility and the need to pivot and change and react quickly as a business. And some of those legacy systems simply don't support that type of working. I think that there's always a lot of, I wouldn't say fear, but some trepidation is perhaps the correct word when organizations are looking to move off of these legacy systems, because they've often been working on them for 10 to 15 years. These are not short-term projects. So there can be a lot of work to get off of them, which I think is often a blocker. But with the more recent adoption of people moving to cloud, I mean, we've been talking about cloud for many years, and I'm now really seeing an acceleration in the market. Again, I think partially, brought on with the challenges around lockdown. And I think there's that ability to be able to focus on your core business, not be an IT company. If you're an insurance company or a bank, you want to give great customer service. You want to write good policies and You don't want to be running an IT company. So I think more organizations are looking to modernize their platforms to allow them to be managed by a wider group and not rely on purely on internal resources. The other thing that I think has driven it, particularly in the content services market, is the ability to present content and data to a wide range of user personas. So there could be internal people working in the organization, checking documents, be it HR, finance, insurance underwriters, whatever else, but also surfacing content to end users and customers, and being able to do that with a persona appropriate interface. And a lot of these legacy systems don't support that ability to manage the content securely with all the relevant governance systems, but then also be able to present it in different, innovative and new ways to be able to meet the varying requirements of internal users, customers, subcontractors, third parties. And I think particularly with the open API infrastructure and architecture that's becoming so important with modern cloud native platforms, the older systems can't always meet those requirements, so don't have that level of flexibility. So I think those are the two kind of key areas that I've been seeing, Neil, that are driving the move away from legacy systems. And I think again, it's accelerating in the past 5 years. We've gone from talking about secure content and document management to talking about accessing it as flexibly as possible, and also adding content to that content under management. And I think as we look at technologies such as AI and ML, artificial intelligence and machine learning, I think that's kind of the next stage of evolution, is to say, okay, how are we adding value and insight to that content to be able to move to the next stage of content services?
Yeah, completely agree with you. And what amazes me is, despite all those frustrations you just spelled out there, many businesses have still remained wedded to those legacy systems for a variety of reasons. And you mentioned artificial intelligence there. I think that has blindsided so many businesses this year, just come out of nowhere. So can you elaborate on some of the concerns that you think might have previously kept them from embracing modern solutions? Is it cost, convenience, custom integrations, or something else? What have you seen here?
Again, all of the above. I think definitely one of the big challenges, particularly when you're looking at very, very large volumes of data and documentation and content, it's difficult to move it from one place to another, and it takes time. I mean, even with with modern technology and the ability of store, the cost of storage coming down and bandwidth going up, it still takes time to move hundreds of millions or billions of documents and petabytes of data from one place to another. And often I think that people are organizations are looking at the fact that, well, it's worked for 10 or 15 years. Am I really going to see enough benefit to make it worthwhile going through that potential cost and inconvenience, and also a degree of risk? Because particularly in the highly regulated industries, moving that amount of data and being able to validate that the data, the content has all moved successfully and completely, and the metadata that is associated with it has also moved, and the governance rules that may be associated with regulated industries are met as well. It's a lot to consider. There also is that custom integration piece. If you're an organization where we find so many organizations who if you go to 15 different parts of the business, they've got 19 different systems, and they don't always talk to each other very nicely. It's often difficult to get them to communicate effectively, and there's so much sticky tape and glue kind of holding things together. The prospect of unpicking some of that and moving to a single platform with an open, cloud native architecture can be very, very daunting. But again, now I think it's becoming, a point of necessity as businesses want to evolve. And I think a lot of that is how technology generally has evolved. We're all used to using our smartphones and living from our smartphones and wanting everything immediately and now. And if it takes more than 7 minutes to get an app downloaded and find pieces of information, I get frustrated. Yeah. And I think now companies are finding that to be able to service the heightened expectations of customers and deliver value to them, they have to be able to build those new integrations and those new interfaces and that new flexibility really, really quickly. I'll just tell you a small story. I was actually talking to one of our large customers in Asia Pacific. It's a bank. And I was talking with looking at all the different applications that they built around one of our systems, and it was amazing that the variety of different applications that they were using it for we weren't even aware of. because they were building a lot of those, those custom front ends and those user interfaces using the APIs. And it was fascinating to see how much further they'd taken the system. And I asked, what was the key driver? Was it that, was it return on investment? Was it cost of ownership? I said, no, we're a bank. We need customers. We need happy customers. If a customer comes to us and is looking for a certain type of loan or mortgage or whatever else they might be looking for, it has to be immediate. We have to be able to service their needs extremely quickly. And that's what was driving their move to that modern architecture away from their legacy systems. And I think that's a really, really interesting tipping point, is moving from cost to value, because the expectations of customers have changed. And at the end of the day, any business that holds data, documents, or anything else is to service a customer one way or another. And I think that's really, really driven the market as well, Neil.
It's such a good point, because I think if we look in our personal lives, everything from Spotify to Netflix, all allow us just to drift from devices seamlessly. We can start a TV show on our phone, switch to our tablet, switch to our TV, switch to our laptop, and it all just kind of works. And there's a great quote, I think it was IBM said this a few years ago, that the last great experience we have anywhere becomes the standard expectation for what we expect everywhere. And as you said, the role of the cloud has been transformative in just about every industry we can think of. But again, we seldom think about those businesses that are in highly regulated and got governance to meet and so many different internal processes, etc. So how does the cloud address the difficulties posed by legacy systems? And on the flip side of that, what benefits does it offer in terms of content management and digital transformation? I appreciate it's a pretty big question. Do you want to go for that?
I'll give it a shot. It's been really interesting for me when we first started seeing more organizations moving to the cloud. We did see a journey. We saw a lot of people asking about it and saying, okay, I want the two different options. And then we saw people focusing on it. And now we're seeing people really having a preference for cloud first. But interestingly, the organizations that I thought would be somewhat more recalcitrant, a little bit more reluctant, are often those regulated industries. And what we've seen the biggest uptake in Europe has been in the financial services and insurance sector, which I wouldn't have guessed at that, because they have extremely highly regulated policies and rules that to meet the financial authorities, which change country by country. They have extremely high levels of security. I mean, particularly if you look at things like GDPR and data privacy, the penalties that can be impacted there can be really, really significant. But they tended, from my business anyway, they've tended to lead the way. I think that, the benefits are that fundamentally there is a bit of a movement of risk from the customer to the PaaS or the SaaS or the platform or the cloud providers, because you're asking, people are asking us to manage their data and saying, and here's how our data must be managed. These are the standards that you must adhere to. The benefit of that is that if I can meet one bank or insurance requirement in a particular country, I can meet the next one because I have the obligation and the regulations to follow regardless. So it's almost like the learnings from one apply to the larger group. Because one of the benefits of PaaS and SaaS solutions is that if we make an improvement or a change to security or encryption or to performance for one particular customer requirement, it then automatically, because it's as a service, it gets applied to the wider customer base. And we're starting to see that level of confidence improve. And I think, again, because of the complexity of meeting some of these requirements and even understanding some of these requirements, many organizations are looking for those subject matter experts to transfer the risk to a greater or lesser degree. And it's really been, again, I would say the last sort of, particularly since lockdown, again, that's accelerated, because organizations need to be able to run their businesses working from anywhere. It could be at home, it could be in the office. Getting hold of computer chips and hardware has got harder. So making it someone else's problem, again, is something a lot of organizations are looking at. So I think that data security is a huge topic, and it comes up in every single customer conversation. And sometimes I almost feel like it's a bit of education is a strong word, but it's a learning curve for many parties, because they're used to buying a piece of software, putting it on some infrastructure which is sitting in the basement of their building, and then they own the piece of software, they use the piece of software, And, and they pay maintenance every year. When you're looking at things as a service, it's a totally different way of thinking. You're not buying the software, you're buying the service that's being provided to you. And, you're having to think in a slightly different way. And rather than putting it in the basement and having 5 people that you probably don't see very often managing it, you've just got an API that you call, and a portal that you're using. So the buying and using experience is changing as well when people are moving to cloud solutions. But I think a lot of it is because, that with the increasing complexity around IT, people want other people to own the issue so they can focus on their kind of core business, which is something I mentioned at the start of it. Regardless of what you're doing, you want to focus on what your business is good at, not being an IT company. And I think with the level of maturity we're seeing and the fact that I would say it's now cutting edge, no longer bleeding edge, I think that adoption is starting to pick up more rapidly.
And I think digital transformation is, of course, a significant undertaking for any organisation. There's been a lot of lessons learned. I think most people agree now that it is a journey rather than a destination. But can you share any insights into how businesses can navigate processes like this, specifically concerning content management, and also maybe expand on the role that a hybrid approach will play, especially around storage, in pacing that business's evolution? Because you don't have to do it all straight off the bat, do you?
No, I think that the first thing is to understand what you're trying to achieve. I think if you lay out, what does success look like? I mean, because you see many organizations say we need a more modern architecture. We need to transform digitally. Okay, why? What are you looking to achieve? And at what point will you say this is now something that we want to push forward and proceed with? And you're absolutely right. It's never a destination. It's always a journey. And I've been fortunate enough to work with some very large customers, which I first sold to way back in the early 2010s, and they're still customers now. And they're using the same solution, but it's evolved and moved to different parts of the business, and gone through different iterations. So I think understanding that it's a journey, but making sure that you've got some success criteria defined around it. The other thing I think, which is really important, is to make sure you understand it isn't just about IT and software in the cloud. It's about people and customers as well. And how's it going to impact them? How do you take them on the journey with you? Because often when you hear digital transformation, people think efficiency, they think reduction in costs, which can lead people to be concerned about their livelihood, particularly in the current climate. And I think digital transformation is about empowering and enabling and providing better customer success and allowing a company to grow. So I think the approach needs to be understanding where you are, working out where you want to get to and how that's successful, making sure that you take the people on the journey along with you. And you mentioned a hybrid approach. With content management, we often see that moving the documentation and the content is one of the largest undertakings. We typically see our customers do want to move it to one place or another. Where we more often see the hybrid approach is with different applications speaking with or communicating with each other in different places. Because very few organizations these days are either full on-premise or in a public cloud provider like AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure. They tend to be using applications from different ones. I was just thinking about this a few weeks ago. When I log into O365 in the morning, it communicates with Confluence and other applications in different cloud hosting provisions. We use our own applications in AWS, which are communicating with O365 elsewhere. So there is that, you don't have to do everything at once, and it's no longer a question of saying, okay, which one am I going to pick? You kind of pick the best of breed of each one, and then try and make sure they're communicating effectively. And also, again, to the journey, we find that a lot of customers, we identify one area to start with and, try and get a minimum viable product to try and show the initial value and maybe overcome some of that hesitancy. And then you see it rolled out, from part of the business to part of the business to different parts of the business. And that's really when you get digital transformation, when you could have the sort of end-to-end journey, where each part of the business is managing things in a digital fashion and not relying on paper and manual processes. But I don't think there's never a right answer. It's always a case of what works for a business and learning as you go along.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. There's no such thing as a right answer. There is no one size fits all cookie cutter approach. And Before we started recording today, you were talking about how you've been working all over the world throughout your career. And one of the things that really stands out to me is the differences between regional markets. Incredibly intriguing, especially with the UK and Europe, sometimes resembling a almost scaled down version of the US. So from your experience, how do regional markets influence content management strategies? Are there any unique challenges business face in different regions? I'm curious what you see here.
So I think, I've spent about 80% of my career working for North American companies. And I think one of the interesting parts is seeing the differences in appreciation that, things are different regionally. And one of the balancing acts that I've always tried to tread, given that I have predominantly worked with North American companies managing other parts of the business, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific, now is firstly to make sure it's clear that Europe isn't just a conglomeration of states like it is in the US. There's often a little bit of history every now and again where some cultures behave differently. I think fundamentally the business challenges that we face are very, very similar. And interestingly, if I look at the verticals where we're successful, particularly in Europe and Asia Pacific, they tend to be quite common. Our two largest verticals are public sector, financial services, and insurance. And in the US, the financial services and insurance sector is very, very important as well. Scale does tend to be different. I mean, a business who's got 20% market share in Spain is clearly much smaller than a business that has 20% market share in the US. And California is the seventh largest economy in the world. I often point out to my American friends that the Netherlands is 34% of the size of New York State, but it's a whole country.
Yeah.
So a lot of the underlying technology challenges are similar. I am seeing some more divergence now with data sovereignty, because particularly in Europe, there is a somewhat different approach based upon the industry that you're working in and the country that you're in. Some countries are very fixed on having in-country management, even looking at is that managed by an American company, a European company, or elsewhere. So we're starting to see some more differences there. The biggest difference I see is in the way that people do business and the way that people communicate. I think that's a big change. A big difference as well. But the underlying requirements tend to be the same. It tends to be scale, approach, and then region-specific requirements that are differing as well. But it's been a fascinating journey and something I'm very grateful for, because it's allowed me to visit a lot of different places and to learn a lot about different cultures, different approaches, and different requirements. And something I hope will continue for some time to come.
And a few moments ago, we talked briefly about artificial intelligence and machine learning and how that's going to pave the way for the next phase. And of course, what that leads to is the world becoming increasingly data-driven. So as a result of that, content and data integration have ultimately become essential for organizations now. So how does Hyland's Technologies Foundation enable your customers to intelligently connect data and processes to help drive efficiency and growth? Because again, huge topics right now.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's a journey. The first stage is to make sure that, fundamentally, everything's in one place and accessible to all the applications. And even that is a big challenge for some organizations. We're working with a couple of organizations in Europe, where the first step is to make sure that all the data and the documentation and the content under management is in one place. Because before you do that, it's not accessible. You're having to look in 10 or 15 different places for it. And that can be a big undertaking. And that's often the first step of digital transformation. The next step then, I think, is to understand how you can examine the processes that are being used and ensure that you're making that content under management and that data available as effectively as possible in a persona-based, in a persona-appropriate fashion. Then I think you get onto the next step, using tools like AI and ML to kind of dig into what there is, what trends you can identify, how you can add additional value or additional metadata to the content that you've got using machine learning or human-assisted machine learning, and then really looking at what value that's going to drive for you, and how your systems are going to are going to interconnect, and making sure that if you are going through a true digital transformation journey, that the content management area is one place to look, but also you need to make sure that your other applications are using common APIs and modern APIs so that the intercommunication between those systems works as effectively as possible. And I think it's still a big learning curve. I mean, as we were talking before we started, you mentioned some of the tools that you use in your day-to-day life that are making things hopefully easier. But it's about working out how they really add value. And I often think that there's a very big difference between hearing an industry buzzword and thinking that's great, I should look at that, and really understanding what's it going to do for me. Also, what risks can it pose? I think that's a big question, particularly around AI at the moment. As there's upsides, but are there also challenges that will bring? And how do I really make that useful and applicable to my business and the customer outcomes that I'm looking to drive?
Absolutely. And at the beginning of our conversation, we're talking about the amount of changes that you've seen and how the industry has evolved. So I'm curious, has the European team for Hyland expanded significantly under your leadership? And what are some of the key strategies that you've employed to achieve growth and success across EMEA and APAC regions? And if it has, how do you maintain a cohesive vision while adapting to region nuances? Again, I'll probably find about 5 questions at you now, but that's
winning the competition for the most points to try and sort of condense down into one conversation. And interestingly, I was talking with Bill Prima, our CEO, last week, and I remember the first time I met him in Berlin, and we were talking about the differences between then and now. And the European business in particular has changed hugely through organic growth and also through acquisition growth. We've made 2 significant acquisitions in the last 4 years in Europe. We were running at double-digit growth before that. And I think, that it was, we were comparing notes on how much has changed and the size of the business. I think it used to be 4 or 5% of Hyland's revenue. Now it's 16, 17. It's just a very, very big change. And what I always tried to do, as far as I've been able, and Bill has been a great supporter of allowing me to do this in a North American company, which I haven't always seen, is able to take the strength of the corporate organization, but give it a more regional focus and make sure we do things slightly differently, trying to follow as much as we can from the core, because that's where the biggest part of the market is, but then making that as appropriate as possible. And I think, I always talk to, when I'm talking to our customers, I want to be a truly global company, but I want to deliver with a regionally appropriate mechanism. So it's, making sure that we've got people in region wherever possible. We have looked to focus more on the enterprise and upper mid-market. That was a clear decision that we made as an organization in Europe 4 or 5 years ago, and it's had clear dividends. The types of organizations we're working with now are typically larger than we would have done previously. And also not to lose sight of the nuance, making sure that if we are trying to sell into Germany, France, Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, whichever country we're looking at, is that we understand the local regulations and requirements, and that we're doing business in a way that is comfortable for the customers in part of the world. And, I think, credit to Bill and the entire senior leadership team in North America for listening to the crazy English guy who occasionally makes jokes about Americans. None of them will mind me saying that. And listening to some of the suggestions and allowing us to behave a little bit differently in Europe, because difference is what makes life interesting. And that's certainly something that Hyland has embraced more in the time that I've been here, I'm pleased to say.
And if I was to ask you to look into your virtual crystal ball and look ahead into the future, I mean, what exciting developments or trends do you see on the horizon for content management and digital transformation? And ultimately, how do you see Hyland staying at the forefront of innovation to meet the evolving needs of customers in this rapidly changing technological landscape? Because if we look back over the last 8 months, so much has changed in a short amount of time. And I appreciate you might be locked down as to how much you can share about the future, but is there anything you can leave us with?
I think one big thing we're seeing is that the content services market is broadening and is starting to move into sectors that we wouldn't traditionally have seen. I mean, a lot of what we do now, particularly with some of our larger customers, is moving into BPM, business process management. It's moving into AI and ML that we talked about. So I feel that content services, whereas it was relatively contained a few years ago, it was managing documents, content, and data. It's now broadening. That scope is broadening. And I think the other big change that I'm seeing is that looking at, okay, how are we really going to add value to the content that's being managed? I mean, we have a tool called Insight, which I'm really excited about. It came in through acquisition, and we're starting to explore how we make sure that all the different content services solutions that we've got are able to be accessed by this particular service, an AI ML tool. So I think looking at that area is, something that we're going to continue to focus on, is how we get a broader addressable market. I think we'll continue to remain acquisitive. I mean, we've been acquisitive for the past 4 or 5 years, and I think we'll see more of those, looking to add technology that's appropriate for our customer base to, further enhance their experience, but not losing that key content services focus. Because, it is a competitive market, and one of the pieces of feedback we get from our customers is that we've stayed true to our core, that we're looking at how we manage that content most effectively, and then adding value to it with other applications around it, as opposed to diverging too much into too many different sectors. I think we'll continue to focus on the next generation of technology, trying to stay ahead. We're seeing, again, I mentioned that cloud native uptake from our customers, be it managed by the Hyland cloud or in public clouds, is increasing. So I think the broadening of the market, the merging of some of those sectors, but the key is, at the end of the day, to listen to our customers and see what they want, because they know where the market's going better than anybody else. Because if you listen to their needs, you can distill that down into where you need to keep focused and remain, ahead of the market and at the front.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for joining me on the podcast today. I think I must have thrown 20 plus questions at you. You've answered them all perfectly, and so many golden insights in there. And I'm going to see if there's something we can do for you in return now, because some of the biggest names in business, VC funding and tech have either been guests or listened to this podcast. So if I was to ask you, is there a person you'd love to have a private breakfast or lunch with? Who would they be and why? Because they might just be listening to this, and let's see what we can manifest together and throw out there into the universe.
This is a really interesting question. I'm trying to think exactly how I'd approach it. I think I'm going to go from the impossible to the potential. Right. So I'd actually like to have 3 people. I'll start with the impossible, which is Charles Babbage, because sort of his difference engine many, many years ago kind of started this whole thing off. I think that would be fascinating. I would love to meet up with Bill Gates, which I think would be extremely difficult. And then I think him and Charles could have a great conversation about, what did you envision and where did they get to? And I think the slightly more possible, because at least I know roughly which geography she's in, would be Tanuja Randari, who's the managing director of AWS in EMEA. Because then we could have where we started, how, Bill Gates transformed it with Windows as an operating system. And then I think, the market leader in cloud providers right now, where that's going for the future. I think that would be a really, really interesting set of people to have a breakfast or dinner with. But I do appreciate that the first one would be probably beyond even your scope of coverage, Neil.
Well, let's aim for 2 out of 3. I mean, Meatloaf said 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So let's throw two of them at least out into the ether. Let's see what we can come back with. And for anyone listening, just wanting to connect with you, contact your team, or find out more information about anything we discussed today, what's the best starting point for everything?
Well, always look at the website, www.hyland.com. That's Hyland. I am very available on LinkedIn and happy to take connections there. I would say those are the best 2 places to find me.
Well, what we didn't mention in the interview there was Hyland creates technology foundations that allow customers, including half of the Fortune 100, to intelligently connect content, data, and processes. But I think what you brought to life today was some of those classic frustrations that legacy systems tend to throw up. I think everybody listening would have been nodding in agreement there. And some of the concerns that have held people back from moving forward as well. Pure gold. I'd love to stay in touch with you and see how this evolves, because at the pace it's going at the moment, I think we may have a very different conversation next year. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing that with me today.
Well, thank you very much for the invite. I very much enjoyed it. And thank you for trying to pack 32 questions into 7. It was a productive use of time, Neil. Excellent. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
So a huge thank you to our guest, Tim Hood, for joining me today, shedding light on the pressing need for digital transformation and intelligent content management. And for me, it was particularly interesting to understand the pivotal role of the cloud and modern technologies in the entire process. And from our discussion today around the differences in regional markets to the possibility for future developments in the content services market, not to mention all those questions I fired at Tim, I think we covered it all in just 30 minutes. And from that conversation, it's clear that businesses need to overcome their reservations about letting go of those legacy systems and embrace modern, efficient ways of connecting content, data, and processes. So if you want to learn more about Hyland or wish to get in touch with Tim, you'll find the necessary contact information on the show notes of the blog post that will accompany this episode over on my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. Just go straight to podcasts at the top, and that will take you to, nearly 2,500 interviews now. And if you want to share any of your insights and experiences about any of the topics we covered today, we did cover a lot in a short amount of time. If you want to carry on this conversation, maybe you want to ask me a question, ask Tim a question, or you just want to share something, or maybe you even want to come and join me on the show, whatever it is, email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, @NeilC.Hughes. It'd be great to bring you into this conversation too. And finally, of course, I'm a podcast host. Every podcast host asks their listeners to subscribe. So please subscribe to Tech Talks Daily. It really does help in the battle against the algorithms, which bring more people to the podcast. And more listeners means great guests like Tim. So a huge thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.